when I saw the movie The Castle, now I'm sure you've seen The Castle, every Aussie's seen The Castle, even Merryl was forced to see The Castle.
I was forced, yes.
And what did you think of it, by the way?
I thought, shit.
Okay, well,
I just can't stand
well,
it.
Merrill's a Kiwi, so you don't really count as far as someone who should appreciate it. We're talking about Rob's book, which is called In the Blink of an Eye. So I've actually got some pictures here. This is the cover of the book, In the Blink of an Eye. And Rob's also actually an illustrator and a photographer and a whole bunch of things, so he prepared that cover as well. So that's, in fact, I didn't realise that he had any particular literary skills, which is, as we go through, I might ask a few questions, Rob, if you're okay to respond to them in any way you like, through messages or whatever you like. But I'm kind of surprised at how clever the work is, what a wordsmith you are. I don't know where those skills came from. I mean, I wouldn't be able to put together something like you did, so congratulations on that. So did you do any lessons or study in any way? I don't know. Anyway, that's the first question. So the background to all of this book, In the Blink of an Eye, Rob is an author. He's living in Denmark now, and he and I were mates as kids. We probably knew each other right from the get-go, but we really only started to form our relationship probably around the age of 9 or 10. And so we were good mates from that age right up until I left home, or we both left home, I guess, which was about 20. So it's mostly about our teenage years, or the bits that relate to me. This book covers a lot more than just references to he and I, but they're the bits that I'm going to be talking about today, because this video is all about me. But I have to say that it's a very good book. There's lots of really interesting things there about how his grandparents got together, and him as learning boxing, and a whole lot of stuff that's really interesting. But the things that I'll be focusing on today are the bits that relate to me. So for those of you that don't know what the background is, Rob, as I say, and I were friends as teenagers, and then he actually is living in Denmark, and he's been there for like 30 or 40 years, so we haven't actually met face to face in probably 40 years. We've kept in touch on social media, but before social media came into being, there was like a 20 or 30 year gap where there was nothing going on, and we just found each other on Facebook or something and started connecting that way. So everything that we're talking about relates to events that occurred sort of in the 50s and 60s, a long time ago. And for me, some of it's a bit sketchy. I'm amazed that, Rob, your powers of recall, you seem to have a photographic memory for a lot of this stuff. Some of it is, I sort of remember that. Yeah, that's right, it's coming back to me now. It's kind of like opening up a archive of memories, and some of it was quite familiar after I thought about it. Other stuff I thought, did I really do that? Did we really do that? But most of it's, pretty easy to recall. I don't know, what were you like remembering stuff in your early years?
Not really. There's bits and pieces, but not much.
Yeah, so I'm really impressed with that. So anyway, as I remember, now I could have this totally wrong, Rob, so you can correct me on this, but for some reason this is the idea that I've got in my head as to how you came to be where you are. As a kid, I went to high school, Rob went to a technical school. His family were plumbers, and it was like the tradition in the family for, plumbers, kids to be plumbers and plumbers through the generations. But Rob never seemed to be, or you never seemed to be all that crazy about that idea, so I wasn't really that surprised when you didn't end up following that through as a long-term career. But as I understand it, when you were travelling around the world, if I've got my recollection correct, you met a lady somewhere in your travels. It might have been in a bar or a pub or something like that, and of course, love blossomed, and you decided that you guys were going to be a couple together. And the initial idea was to set up life here in Australia. And so you brought this lady to Australia. I think her name's Gitta, something like that. Again, sorry if I got that pronunciation wrong. But anyway, and so that didn't work out too well. I think mainly because she came from a very cool climate and the weather wasn't really comfortable for her. And again, I think the story goes something like how you kept moving her further and further away from the equator to try and make her comfortable, and ended up down in Tasmania, and you had her sitting in a bath full of ice water or something to try and keep her cool in the hot weather, and even that didn't work.
Sounds like a mermaid, doesn't it?
A bit like you. Well, you came from a very cold climate. You came from Christchurch, but you didn't have a lot of trouble adjusting to the warm
I hate the
climate.
cold. Hate it. Can't stand it.
So in fact, you're probably even less tolerant of the cold than I am, and I've spent my whole life here, so I don't know what's that all about? Just genes, I suppose.
Just lucky.
So you're very comfortable here, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so because you couldn't make yourselves comfortable here, you thought, okay, we'll go and live on her side of the world, and so off you went to Northern Hemisphere and set up shop there where you stayed. And because of your artistic skills and your photographic skills and whatever, you were able to build a career around that, which is great. It's really good if you can build a career around what you like. You would know that too, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Your career is now built around what you like and love, hey?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if I've got all that wrong, I might even be telling you a story that's about somebody totally different. Let me know, and I apologise for that. So here we go. What I thought I'd do is pick out some of the more interesting parts of the book and read some of the passages out, and we can talk about how much of that I remember and what it all means to me. So let's go to the first bit where I turn up in the book. By the way, before I turn up, some of the interesting things related to the fact that you were talking about stuff that you did with Pete up the road. Now, I remember Pete sort of as a distant friend, not a close friend as he was for you. And one of the things that amused me was you were talking about Pete's pedal car that I think came from a relative overseas. A really good, I do remember this pedal car. Now, I don't know how old we would have been, probably 3 or 4 or something like that. But I do remember everybody crowding around Pete and this red pedal car because it was like a replica, a miniaturised replica of a real car. And anybody who got to ride in that pedal car was like just king. And one of the things that I really wished that I'd had the opportunity to do was to even just sit in that pedal car as a passenger, much less actually hang on to the steering wheel and drive it.
So boys.
But that never happened. I just wasn't close enough in that inner circle to get to sit in that pedal car, which is, I suppose, one of my life's not biggest regrets. It's a fairly small regret, but that's one of the, when you referenced that, that's what came back to me. Anyway, moving on from Pete on to Don. Okay, here we go. Now here's the first reference to me in the book. Okay, my best mate was a knockabout kid by the name of Don, who was as tall as I was short. By the way, I don't remember you being particularly short. Obviously, there was a big height difference, but maybe as mates it just wasn't apparent to me that much. Anyway, and who from an early age displayed an unnaturally dry and cynical sense of humour.
Still got it.
That's still true?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
While Pete's house was 4 doors up the street, Don lived 4 doors down in his grandparents' house, together with his divorced mother and spinster aunt. Don's grandparents slept in a porch which had been built between the back of the house and the external laundry and toilet. The toilet supported a wide wooden seat that stretched from wall to wall, fashioned and sanded from a plank of Baltic pine. So the seat in our toilet was really memorable. That's an interesting thing. I can't even remember much about my toilet seat, but Rob, you seem to have that seat nailed, so that's quite impressive. Anyway, the grandparents' big double bed was pushed up against the weatherboards at the back of the house proper, piled high with a thick eiderdown and only separated from the elements by a white linen curtain and the fly wire that ran the 2 sides of the porch, waist height. In the summer it would have been delightful, but on winter's nights it must have been bitterly cold and drafty out there. Yeah, I thought the same thing. I don't know why they weren't on the inside and we were on the outside, but for some reason they wanted it that way around and I could never quite figure that out. Anyway, Yet the old couple steadfastly maintained it much healthier sleeping in the fresh air, and since they both lived to a ripe old age, they may have had a point. Don's grandfather stood in front of the mirror each morning, scraping the white stuff off his tongue with a cutthroat razor,
that's disgusting.
believing it was another avenue to good health. Not something that you thought was a good health thing to do?
Oh.
Now, this is one of those things that I had forgotten about, but when I read about it, I thought, yes, well, I do remember him doing that, and it was pretty gross.
Yeah.
So thanks for bringing that back to my attention, Rob. That was
That's a
good.
visual I don't need to have, but thanks.
I know, you've never heard of any health
No,
benefits?
no.
Because you're right into health and things that you can do.
Oh, no.
Okay, maybe it's something we should take up to give it a crack for a while.
You can, and when it kills you, I'll let you know.
Okay. Don's offbeat sense of humour and his vivid imagination were probably developed in part as a counterpoint to the realities of living under one roof with four adults. Don's grandfather, another of the street's great war veterans, was a tall, wiry old fella, and he told us he'd been both an opera singer and a boxer in his youth, although I was never sure if he was pulling our leg. He was a decent old bloke doing his best under the circumstances to provide Don with some kind of father figure, the only one Don had known, since as far as I knew he had no contact with his father who lived interstate. All that's correct. But the old man was knocking on 80, and I always had the impression that it might not have been the old age he envisaged for himself, and that he didn't necessarily think too much of our generation of youth. Also correct. In fact, I didn't really have much to do with him at all. In fact, all the members in the family were quite kind of, it wasn't a dysfunctional relationship, that's too strong a word, but everyone was fairly emotionally distant, I suppose. And it was one of the things that I admired about your family and other families was how sort of warm and, family orientated everything was compared to our family. In fact, when I saw the movie The Castle, now I'm sure you've seen The Castle, every Aussie's seen The Castle, even Merrill's was forced to see The Castle.
I was forced, yes.
And what did you think of it, by the way?
I thought, shit.
Okay, well,
I just can't stand
well,
it.
Merrill's a Kiwi, so you don't really count as far as someone who should appreciate it. But the story of the family in the castle was so much like what I imagined Rob's family was. Everyone was...
Rose-tinted glasses, I'm thinking.
No, it was like a classic Aussie family with lots of, good stuff going on, lots of relatives to hang out with and all the rest of it. So that was, in fact, let's have a look here. I grabbed a picture of the movie. There we go. This was the movie The Castle.
Yeah.
Okay, and those characters in the movie and the way they were portrayed was so much like the way you described in the book. First of all, there was you talk about going to Boyd Town on holidays. Now, by the way, I always thought it was Boytown, B-O-Y, like a town for where boys go and hang out and do things. I eventually worked out after a few years.
It's like the lyrics that you misunderstand.
That's right, that you were talking about a place called Boytown. But when you'd say, we're going to Boytown, I thought off to Boytown again. Now, in the castle, if you've seen it, I'm sure you probably have, just like you guys all went off to Boyd Town for your holidays and did your fishing and boating and all the rest of it, the Kerrigans, they were called, would go off to Bonnie Doon, and they had a lake and they did boating and everything, just the way that I imagined that you guys would have behaved when you were on your holidays at Boytown. In fact, the father, there's a famous sort of quote from the movie that the father, was that Dale Kerrigan, the father?
Darren.
Or Darren?
Darren.
One of the kids was, anyway, the father, let's call him Daryl, he was in the movie, he's sitting out there, looking at the water and thinking about how great it was, and he said, when we're on holidays here, it makes you think you wouldn't be dead for quids, would you? And you mentioned that in your book. Now, in the movie, Dale Kerrigan is sitting out there enjoying his holiday, and he says, what's his line?
How's the serenity?
How's the serenity? Kicking back. And it's the same thing. It's almost like the movie was made about you guys. So there you go, The Castle, if you haven't already seen it. So that's how I sort of thought of you guys. And I was very lucky to be able to sort of be involved with your family, because without that sort of normal family contact, I don't know what would have happened to me, because that sort of distorted perspective on the world that I had from just living with those
What
women.
do you mean? You still got a distorted view of the world.
Well, it would have been even worse then. Can you imagine how bad it would have been if I hadn't had some normal influence?
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Anyway, so where was I? Yeah, the other man. Okay, by the three women. His grandmother was at least half deaf, and the maiden aunt possibly as well. So the main form of conversation was something close to yelling, and I'm sure it all ended up with tinnitus. Now that's quite true. I do have tinnitus. Quite right, Robert. On the left-hand side. But I was only made aware of it probably in my 40s and 50s, and I put it down to a fireworks night that we went to with the kids, and there were a lot of loud noises going off. But you could well be right that the tinnitus came from stuff that we did. I don't know. Anyway, somewhere along the line, Don developed a fascination with fire, which I suppose to say that he was a pyromaniac, although that might be too strong a word, but then again, it might not. You don't think so?
No.
Yeah, no, I did like to. Anyway, he also had a weakness for explosives, and on the two occasions in the year when fireworks went on sale in celebration of Empire Day and Guy Fawkes Night, either occasion simply known to us kids as Cracker Night, saw a large part of Don's pocket money being invested in the acquisition of firecrackers, the majority of those being the big bunger kind you could buy at the time. A sixpenny bunger was the closest thing you could legally buy to a stick of dynamite, and God knows how many kids must have lost fingers and eyes to those things, as they had a frightening amount of explosive power. They could send the lids of rubbish bins several feet into the air, producing a bang loud enough to have heads peering over fences up and down the street. Now, that's all true. In fact, I remember that the focal point for the Cracker Night was actually across the road from your place. Well, there was a big bonfire that we started assembling days, maybe even weeks before the big event, where people would come and put bits of wood and chairs and furniture and trees and things onto this thing. It was probably like a couple of, well, no, not a couple of stories high, but at least the height of the of one story of a house. And then, of course, on the big Cracker Night, we'd come and light the bonfire and we'd do all the fireworks thing. And I remember that there were people running around lighting crackers, putting them in their kids' pockets, usually bigger kids, older kids, in fact even a couple of adults. They'd light a cracker, stick it in one of our kids' pockets, and then the cracker would go off and think it was hysterically funny when our pants caught on fire or something. But that was back in the day.
That explains a lot about Australians.
So you didn't do the Cracker Night thing in New Zealand?
No. As far as I remember, we didn't have fireworks. It may have been legal, but I'm
Well, you were
child of the
deprived. How much
60s.
fun did you miss out on? Not having
None apparently.
Well, apart from getting your arse burnt every now and again, most of it was really good fun. And as
Except for the people who got hurt. Oh, woo.
yeah, well, anyway, it was really good night, and thanks to your family with the big bonfire out the front, it made it extra good. Anyway, so Mr. Cotton, who lived a few doors up and who wore braces and a fedora, which gave him the look of a bookie rather than the bus driver he was, had a predilection for lighting the wicks of these big bungers off the cigarette, and which invariably hung from his mouth. That was harmless enough, but he also clearly got a kick out of then throwing them near the feet of kids like ourselves and nearly wetting himself laughing when we scattered in all directions. We would only make a few feet before the ear-splitting bang covered us in little bits of Chinese paper and sulphur fumes, unable to hear much anything else for the next 10 minutes. Yes, so maybe that is where the tinnitus came from. I don't know if Mr. Cotton had served in the Second World War, but if he had, I imagine it must have been pretty handy with the hand grenades. Since crackers were only available through a relatively short period of the year, Don looked to other sources of explosive material, and the one he settled on by virtue of its ready availability was petrol. The supply of petrol for Don's explosive experiments came from the gallon can from his mother kept in the garden shed to run their 4-stroke mower. Since it was Don's weekly chore to mow the lawns and even get the petrol can filled, he had a ready access to the supply. Quite right. Actually, my mum I was talking to my mum about me mowing the lawns, and she said that I didn't mow the lawns. And I said, well, of course I mowed the lawns. I don't know whether there was a memory problem there, but I definitely did a lot of lawn mowing, and this was definitely a side benefit, having access to that petrol, that's for sure. It always amazed me that Don's mother never twigged to the fact that the mower appeared to be going through the petrol, more petrol than a poorly tuned V8, and it amazes me how Don or myself never wound up strung up to life support machines in a burns unit or serially mowing for life, given our potentially fatal experiments. Quite right, Rob, we probably did have a few close calls there. Among Don's other pastimes was the watching of copious amounts of television, especially that of the late night kind, and it was from that source that he found some of the inspiration for his pyrotechnic experiments. Probably the most harebrained of these experiments involved homemade flamethrowers. The process for producing them was devilishly clever in its simplicity and probably best left undescribed, but nevertheless was very effective, and our handheld devices would send a liquid arc of lethal flame 10 or 20 feet with a with a little flame sitting on top of a nozzle. We would walk around setting fire to objects we had designated for destruction.
Do your kids now, if they did that, they would be in jail?
Well, only if somebody found out about it. I mean, it probably wasn't legal
No,
then.
you had adults throwing crackers.
That's true.
It says a lot about Australians, I have to say.
I remember it did take a few prototypes before we got that thing, or I got that thing perfected. My initial plan was to just use a water pistol, the obvious thing, right? Put the petrol in the water pistol, squirt the thing, light the end, boom. But the flaw there was that the plastic in the, yeah, that's right, the petroleum in the fuel melted the petroleum in the plastic, and that didn't work.
You still do experiments. Not as successful, but you do still do them.
What experiments?
Oh, you think, oh, well, I'll just put this on this and this, and I go, that won't work. No, it doesn't work.
Well, I get a 50-50 hit rate, so I've always had at least a 50-50 hit rate.
Really? So. 50-50? That's high.
So there's a few failures along the way, but, you know, no gain without pain. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, we had to come up with something that was not dissolved in petrol, but like you say, Rob, we won't divulge the actual
method.
The method, yeah. Anyway, so this the thought that this incredibly stupid pastime could have cost us our lives or serious disfigurement never occurred to us. Well, it didn't, did it? Look, we were right, we were fine. What I consider, though, to be the piece de resistance of Don's pyrotechnic experiments was one he fashioned after taking in yet another of his late-night war movies, in which a ship was sinking amid a sea of burning oil or fuel. The site Don chose for this experiment was the lime green concrete bird bath that sat atop a pedestal beneath his grandmother's prize apple tree in the backyard. This location, as it turned out, was not the most inspired of choices. He decided to carry out this experiment at about 8:30 at night to achieve the maximum visual effect and also minimise the chances of being caught. As it was, when the three women of the house would be sitting in the living room at the front of the house watching one of their favourite sitcoms. Yeah, I do remember all this. This is quite a clear memory, all this one. After first filling the bird bath to adequate depth, Don placed one of his old plastic Airfix models of a battleship, and in fact I think I created that battleship specifically with this idea in mind, because I wasn't that keen on ships and things, but I could see that this could be a good use for it. Eagerly aided and abetted by myself, poured a liberal amount of petrol from the mower can into the bird bath in a recreation of the scene in the movie. Somehow, sensing that this was going to be a memorable event, I encouraged him to be as heavy-handed as possible with the petrol, giving him the misinformation that since the water would partially mix with the petrol, then a liberal amount would be needed to ignite it. Yeah, I fell for that one. Anyway, and although Don probably saw the misinformation for what it was, he upended the petrol can over the bird bath. Once more for good measure. Standing back a respectable distance, Don lit a match and flicked it into the bird bath. The expression on our faces when the petrol ignited probably resembled those of the scientists at Los Alamos as they witnessed the detonation of the first atomic bomb in the desert of New Mexico. Yeah, it was pretty scary.
Oh, fucking hilarious.
It's so much fun, yeah. In this case, Ground Zero was no empty desert landscape, and the resulting fireball not only defoliated the guts of his grandmother's beloved apple tree, but brought the three slipper-wearing women running pell-mell out into the yard to investigate whatever the hell it was that had just rattled all the window panes and sucked half the oxygen out of their house.
Yeah, I got away with words. That's great.
Yeah, you are a really good wordsmith, Rob. Well done for that.
Oh,
Let me know where they came from. Did you read something, study something? I don't know. It was very good anyway. I couldn't put something together like this. I can barely read it intelligently. Anyway, on the way out, Don's silver-haired grandmother, a short, stout, ample-breasted woman, grabbed a hold of the straw broom which stood by the back door, instinctively realising that Don was behind the explosion, which had at least one neighbour peering over the back paling fence. Upon seeing the smoking, defoliated guts of her apple tree, she started chasing him around the yard, taking great swipes at him with the broom. That was a fairly common thing that happened down there. My grandmother chasing me with this broom. Anyway, and all the while heaping abuse on him, chorused by both his mother and aunt, who tried to help round him off. His grandmother's favourite expression when Don had run afoul of her, which was very often, by the way, was to call him a good-for-nothing brute. So yeah, I may have had a bit of a inferiority complex as a result of constantly being told how stupid and useless and pointless I was, but thanks to other more positive influences like your family, Rob, and others around the place, I survived all that. So this is what you've got, Merryl. Sorry about that.
yeah, that's all right.
Although my complicity in this act of arson was no doubt suspected, I was left alone to suppress howls of laughter at the blackened apple tree while Don and the three women ran in circles around the yard.
I can visualise it, but I can't imagine. I cannot imagine. My mum would not have done that. She would not have chased us like that.
Well, what would have happened in your little world if something like that had happened and you were involved?
Well, we had a fire in the creek because we lived on a farm, and we were cooking, stewing apples and frying sausages and bacon and eggs and stuff, and the surrounding grass caught fire, and we threw everything we had in we had a pot, so we were potting water out of the creek onto the fire, and Dad's comment the next day was, "Oh, some idiot set fire to the grass."
That he would have suspected.
Of course
it was
he would
guys.
have known, because there was a fry pan out there.
And that was it. That was the only repercussion.
As far as I can remember. Yeah.
Well,
But it did scare the living shit out of us.
So did you guys ever do anything where anyone got injured or hurt or?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I think that's the trigger, isn't it? If people, all these
I got a
things.
scarf from climbing a barbed wire fence.
Oh yeah, what's the story there?
Oh, we had friends coming in on a Sunday afternoon, and you had to be there, otherwise Mr. Maguire would keep your bag of lollies. So we were all rushing to get there, and we were climbing this barbed wire fence, and I got caught on the barbed wire fence, and I had this big flap.
How old?
Four or five maybe, and I had this big flap of skin down thing, you see all the fat and the veins and the meat underneath it. It was disgusting, but I got 2 bags of lollies, so all good.
Well, see, with all the crazy stuff that we did, nobody really ever got hurt, so you know, nothing like that, even like that happened. So I guess the thing is that without accountability, you just keep repeating, don't you?
Yeah, well, do you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, you keep doing something
but
and
you
it's
do
fun
different things.
until something stops you.
Well, we had this big quarry in it wasn't huge, but it was an old terraced hill that used to be a quarry, and we went to the top of it with a 44-gallon drum. The top had been cut off of it. We stuck an old mattress in, jumped in, one of us at a time, and somebody pushed you off the cliff. Boom, boom, boom. And it just rolled across and hit the fence at the far side, jumped out and pushed the thing back up.
Well, again, wrapped in the mattress, that's pretty safe, isn't it? What can happen,
yeah,
really?
I know, but really? If kids
suppose
did
what
that
can
now,
happen,
there would be hell to pay.
Yeah, I know, isn't it? Everyone's sort of wrapped in cotton wool and whatever. But yeah, okay, there were probably casualties, probably a few kids died, lost limbs and things, but look at the character of our generation compared to...
I rest my case.
Yeah. Anyway, So Don took all this, collective wrath of the three women. Don took all this pretty much in his stride. The three women, in fact, doted on him most of the time, and his grandmother, an invalid pensioner aunt, mothered him as much as his mother, although at times they seemed sadly conscious of the fact that there was an enormous, unbridgeable gulf between their generation and his, and just as importantly, between their sex and his. That's right, as I said, there was a bigger... I had all the things that I needed, all those sort of material needs were met, but, we didn't really have any meaningful kind of connection in any normal sort of family way. But yeah, whatever, that's okay. I'm not really complaining. I'm very happy because although Rob's family, it was great. It would have been great to be in a family like that. Those families, you have to wait for things. You can't just get everything you want. You have to share bedrooms, all that kind of stuff. So I guess there's an up and a downside to it all. Anyway, they would shake their heads in exasperation or mutter things beneath their breath whenever they felt their best efforts to shape this big, free-spirited youth into a decent and responsible young man may have been falling short of the mark. Or I was constantly reminded of how far short of the mark I was. That's correct. Should we count it, Rob? Anyway, in due course, and no doubt, very fortunately, Don eventually outgrew his fascination with the properties of fire and explosive, but not before several close shaves, which included setting fire to a neighbour's paling fence and on another occasion setting fire to a large gum tree across the road. Now this one I do remember quite clearly. From his house, where he tried to light a little barbecue fire in the primitive tree hut that we built there. He chose a bad day to light a fire. It was midsummer and the temperature was probably around 90, as we would have said then, when we still talked in Fahrenheit. That's probably about nearly 190, probably about 36 or 7 or something like that. Centigrade. Something was definitely lost when we could no longer talk of days when the mercury topped 100. Our street was a little unique on account of the fact that the houses only fronted onto our side of the street, and on the opposite side there was a wide nature strip of about 30 feet between the road and the back paling fences on the houses on the next street. That was awesome. It was like having this massive play area on the other side of the street, all the way up and down the street, which we would ride our bikes and motorbikes and things. So lucky with that one, that's for sure. Anyway, some of the people in our street took it upon themselves to mow and maintain that strip of land opposite their houses, but for some reason that feeling of civic responsibility appeared to have only taken root at the upper end of the street, and from the area of Don's house down, the nature strip was left to grow wild until the local council once or twice a year came with a slasher to keep the long grass under control. No way I was going to mow the lawn on the other side of the road. So yeah, that's why I didn't do it. Anyway, on the day of our treehouse barbecue, the grass was fairly long and dry as straw. There were 3 of us up the tree. As Don put the match to the small pile of kindling placed in the upturned galvanised rubbish bin lid in the treetop perch, the third person was solidly built kid by the name of Charlie, and he was a purposeful and industrious lad. As dark as Don was blonde, and he was usually the most sensible of the 3 of us. Actually, Mum thought everybody in the street was more sensible than me. Yeah, but you're right. Probably Charlie had the highest sensible rating. You were sort of somewhere in the middle, and of course I was right at the bottom of the barrel, as usual. Anyway, on that particular day, however, it appeared that Charlie's better judgment had deserted him, and he eagerly assisted Don in the setting up of the barbecue. For once I had actually foreseen the danger of lighting a fire in the tree and had tried to warn the others of it beforehand. I had an especially bad feeling about it when Don had trouble getting the kindling to light via conventional means, and ducked back across the road to fetch half a cup of fire starter from the ready source of the mower fuel can.
Oh, you idiot.
Innovation, that's what this is.
I did like...
But it was a case of 2 against 1, and the fact that I was 6 months or so older than them both didn't wash with them either. I could either join in the barbecue lunch or find something else to do. When the match hit the petrol vapors, all hell broke loose. We used a loose flax rope to tie the boards of our perch to the tree, and the fire took a liking to these. We all started whacking at the flames with whatever we had at hand, but despite our best efforts to extinguish the fire, the flames ran up the flimsy rope, and it was the fuses of fireworks, like the fuses of fireworks. On account of the fact that I had for once predicted the danger, I had one of those told you so grins all over my face. As Don and Charlie so about the danger only moments before got more and more panicked, beating frantically now at the flames. My grin turned into howls of laughter. Yeah, I remember you being not particularly helpful, and I do remember you sort of standing back and laughing while we were frantically trying to stop this impending disasters. So that part was actually quite clear. Anyway, it was when flaming bits of rope and bark started dropping onto the long tinder dry grass beneath the tree, however, that the real panic started. Suddenly looking down, we realised that the fire in the tree was small bananas compared to what was happening below. We all scrambled down from the tree and frantically tried to extinguish all the spot fires springing up erratically beneath the tree. I gave my best efforts despite the fact that I was nearly doubled up with laughter. By now, the nervous kind. Fortunately for us, the tree fire burned itself out pretty quickly, and we finally managed to stamp out the grass fire before it got completely out of hand. For a few minutes, though, it was definitely touch and go. Don and Charlie didn't manage to see the funny side of it and didn't speak to me for the rest of the afternoon. Quite amazing that it didn't appear to be any witnesses to our little drama, and we all kept a very keen eye on the Carruthers front windows, half expecting Mr. Carruthers to suddenly come bounding out of his front door, screaming blue murder. But luck was on our side that day. If the grass fire had taken off down the street and on a hot afternoon, we might well have finished our educations in a correctional facility. I wonder, here's another question for you, Rob, I'm thinking as we go. Do you still have any contact with either Pete or Charlie? I know he's in the Navy or something now, but pretty much everyone's got social media now. I certainly don't have any contact with any of those other kids, but do you still have any contact with them? And what are they up to? Largely on account of the grass fire episode, our pyrotechnic experiments were more or less put on permanent hold. All things considered, we'd been given a good and thankfully expensive lesson on the dangers of messing around with flammable liquids and how quickly a fire can go from being manageable to deadly. For the rest of the summer, Don and I looked for safer ways to entertain ourselves, like jumping off the laundry roof while holding an umbrella to see if it would act like a parachute, or having a three-way competition with Charlie to see who could drink the most water in the space of an hour, which incidentally Charlie won by downing several pints, carefully measured out in pint milk bottles. Don and I also took the train to Flinders Street Station with our new water pistols. We sat in the window seats of the red Rattler trains and the carriages and had sash windows you could actually raise and lower. These were really old trains, yeah. As the train pulled in and out of stations, we sat with our water pistols tucked into our armpits and would give people a quick blast of water through the open window as they stood on the platform, while we pretended to be looking the other way. It was hilarious fun seeing the look of shock on people's faces.
Quite harmless, but if you did that now, you'd get your ass.
Yeah, I know. Until, I don't know, they have station masters now to stop you.
Yeah, they do. Well, they do, but not to the same extent. They would be looking for you at the station ahead. They'd wait for you.
Probably.
And they'd put ticketies on the train and you'd get your ass handed to you.
Yeah. Anyway, until the station master at Camberwell walked into our carriage like Wyatt Earp and pulled us from the train like a couple of small-time train robbers. He marched us into his office and demanded our names and addresses. We were not stupid enough provide our real names or addresses, of course. We've seen the movies, we know that you don't do that. And I'm pretty sure the station master realised as much. The police were mentioned, long minutes passed, and he demanded that we hand over our weapons. He wanted us to sweat a little, and on that score he succeeded. Having sufficiently scared the crap out of us, we promptly scratched water pistol ambushes from our summer entertainment list. Don was one of those kids with a very low threshold of boredom. That's not me.
Still has that.
Really?
You have to be entertained every moment of every day.
Well,
one way or another.
I guess some things are genetically hardwired in our DNA. I don't know. What can you do?
Fight the urge, I say.
And he was always very fond of practical jokes, which of course made him fun to be around, as long as you weren't on the receiving end of one of his jokes. When we made our excursion into the city, he usually headed straight to Bernard's Magic Shop in Elizabeth Street. Oh yeah, that was a great spot. Being one of his favourite haunts because they sold things like whoopee cushions, dribble glasses, sneezing powder, or plastic dog shit and vomit. Yeah. Especially the plastic dog shit, that was so good. Which you would then spray with a little water for a more realistic look. Indistinguishable from the real thing, I have to say, apart from maybe the smell, but otherwise. It just looked like a real thing. The place was practically
So
joking.
that's the old version of the poo emoji.
I guess, except that you put this thing on the floor tables, you know, all around the place. You can't do that with a digital emoji. Much more useful. Anyway, this place was practical joker's heaven. The picture theatre was his favourite place to blow around sneezing powder. I do remember doing that quite clearly. And he saw this as a harmless bit of fun, which it was, of course. Although it might have not been so harmless or funny, perhaps, if any asthmatics had been sitting at close range, as my mother pointed out at the time, when I related the prank to her. Most commonly, the usual victims of his youthful pranks were the three women in the house. Most were relatively harmless, and occasionally something a little on the risky side. The most potentially fatal of these occurred one weekend when, alone and bored, he decided to unscrew the antique bright brass light switch cover on his bedroom to expose the contacts. Yes, I do remember this one very clearly, as clear as day, of course, because of what happened, as you'll hear. He told me later that it would be a hoot when the women of the house walked into the bedroom and reached around the door jamb in the dark to turn on the light and would feel only the gadgets inside, as he put it, instead of the light switch cover. Although Don was far from a dull kid, I was pretty dull, sorry Rob, he said he just didn't realise that through those very same brass contacts was causing a lethal amount of electricity. In what was probably a very fortunate lapse of memory, Don forgot that he'd unscrewed the cover and, returning to his bedroom after being outside for a while, reached for the switch, instantly discovering 240 excellent reasons why light switches are best left with their covers on.
I think that is just fucking...
It's one of those moments, what do they call them, defining moments that sort of get burned into the hard drive that is there in every minute detail, and that one was definitely one of them, yeah.
So, like on the cartoons when you touched all the electricity, did you light up black and white and you could see your skeleton?
Oh, probably. No, I just remember this. It was actually this sort of physical pain all through my body and sort of shaking, and I, for a few seconds, I couldn't work out what it was. I mean, that's how stupid I was. It wasn't until I sort of, after a few seconds and I was back on the bed, that I kind of worked out what had gone on there. Anyway, when I dropped in his house to visit him an hour or so later, he was lying on his bed and looking rather pale. The cover was back on the light switch. He didn't want to mention the episode to his mother or the other women for fear of consequences, but told me that he'd just lain down on the bed to recover, saying it was a pretty lousy feeling and that when the electricity hit him, he felt like all the bones in his body were knocking together. Yep, that's right. Don came good again later in the day with no other permanent effects than a newfound respect for electricity and perhaps a slightly recalibrated heart rhythm. He even realised himself that it was a good thing that it was he who had put his hand on the switch and certainly not his grandmother or invalid aunt, neither of whom would have very likely have survived the experience. Not that his mother would have been all that impressed had he found her hand on the bare switch or necessarily lived to recount the experience either. For the most part, though, Don's mum seemed remarkably laid back and often appeared to take a boys will be boys approach to many of Don's youthful antics. Well, according to Rob, I don't know. Anyway, I guess it's a different person's perspective, but maybe so, compared to the other women in the house, possibly. She was a tall, intelligent lady who spoke, for the most part, in a countrified drawl, and it was no doubt from her that Don inherited his very dry and often incisive wit. Oh, thank you, Ron. She worked as a school secretary and was the breadwinner of the house, and that fact, together with her bearing and down-to-earth manner, appeared to make her, at least as seen in my eyes, the unspoken head of the house. Yeah, I guess that's probably right. I always liked her and I was keen to have her respect. Whether I succeeded on that score is anyone's guess. Well, definitely, yeah. Like I said, basically everybody, all the kids in the neighbourhood, she had more respect for than me, so that would, by definition, put you higher up. But no, I think she was quite happy with you and thought that my contact with you was a positive thing from what I remember. So, yeah, no problem there. Anyway, I envied Don every Sunday as he had the morning to himself to do as he pleased. I had a church service and Sunday school to attend to at the local Anglican church, the Holy Redeemer, each week. Save for my weeks of our summer holiday. Mum and Dad were not regular churchgoers themselves, but obviously felt that there were benefits to our kids attending the Sunday school.
Yeah, they got out to shag.
Yes, I guess that's
Younger
right.
brothers and sisters, were there?
Yeah, everyone was gone, so you're quite right. Yep.
Yeah, there you go. Method to their madness.